Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the second night of the annual Straum Lectures at the University of Washington, featuring Julia Watts-Belzer. We acknowledge that the University of Washington occupies the unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the lands which touch the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Puyallup, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations, whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. That having been said, land acknowledgements are empty unless coupled with active and relentless respect, recognition, and reparations. There are 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington state, and another 5 tribes from whom the government deprives recognition. The Duwamish tribe, which is the host both of our city and our campus, is among these. If you're interested in justice-seeking action, I recommend that you visit Real Rent Duwamish to learn more. Hi, my name's Sarah Stroop. I'm a professor of ancient Greek and Roman studies, housed in the department that is called Classics, unfortunately, and I hold affiliate positions in Jewish studies and comparative religion. My research interests include the literature and politics of the final years of the Roman Republic, specifically how people write when going gets tough. Also advanced technologies of the ancient world and the cultural, linguistic, and literary interactions between Jews, Greeks, and Romans in the ancient world. I also direct Humanities First, which is a new first-year experience for incoming students who have expressed interest in the humanities. And as a humanist working in the ancient Greek and Latin writing past, I strongly believe that as much as the past has its own value as an object of study, it finds its greatest meaning as a means to make sense of our present. On behalf of all of us in the Straum Center for Jewish Studies, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this event, and thank you all for coming. Behind the scenes of programming like the Straum Lectures are dedicated professionals like Sarah Zades-Rosen, Kara Schoonmaker, Emily Thompson, Lauren Kurland, and Rosa Losley. My gratitude for them for their dedication in transitioning the Straum Lecture Series online so seamlessly. The lecture series on reading Jewish texts in an age of climate change is co-sponsored by the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, the Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies, and the Disability Studies program at the University of Washington, as well as the Washington Coalition of Rabbis. Julia Watts-Belzer is Associate Professor of Jewish Studies in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, as well as core faculty in Georgetown's Disability Studies program, and a Senior Research Fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Her research centers on gender, sexuality, and disability in rabbinic literature, as well as queer feminist Jewish ethics. She directs an initiative on disability and climate change, which brings together disability activists, artists, policymakers, and academics to address how disability communities are disproportionately affected by environmental risk and climate disruption. Julia's work brings ancient texts into conversation with disability studies, queer theory, feminist thought, and environmental ethics. She is the author of Rabbinic Tales of Destruction, Gender, Sex, and Disability in the Ruins of Jerusalem, published by Oxford University Press in 2018, and Power, Ethics, and Ecology, Rabbinic Responses to Drought and Disaster, published by Cambridge University Press in 2015. Her next book, intended for a broad readership, is titled Breath and Bone, Disability Politics and the Bible, which will be coming out in 2023 with Beacon Press. A rabbi and longtime advocate for disability and gender justice, Belzer writes queer feminist Jewish theology and brings disability arts and culture into conversation with Jewish tradition. She co-authored an international health handbook for women with disabilities, published by the Hesperian Foundation in 2007, developed in collaboration with disability activists from 42 countries and translated into 14 languages, designed to help challenge the root causes of poverty, gender violence, and disability discrimination. She's an avid wheelchair hiker, a lover of wild things, and a passionate supporter of disability dance. If you're viewing this video on the Jewish Studies website, click the link directly below the video to view a source sheet for this talk. Otherwise, you may access it at jewishstudies.washington.edu/textsheet. Please feel free to send in questions for the Q&A at any time during the talk. To send in a question, use your phone or open another tab in your web browser to visit slido.com/Belzer, where you can type in your questions. So now please join me in warmly and virtually welcoming Julia Watts-Belzer, whose talk this afternoon is titled Reading Jewish Texts in the Age of Climate Change, The Afterlives of Noah's Ark, Gender, Disability, and the Politics of Survival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. And thank you, everyone who has done so much work to bring these Straum lectures to fruition. It is a tremendous pleasure to be back for the second Straum lecture. Thanks so much to those of you who've returned, and welcome to those of you who are joining today for the first time. In this lecture, I'd like to lay out some of the ways that climate change poses particular risks to marginalized and minoritized communities. And then I'd like to think with you about the way that Jewish texts can shed light on some of the ethical questions of climate justice. So I want to begin by laying out a problem, a specific issue that's central to my thinking. That's the fact that people with disabilities face disproportionate risk from climate change, especially climate-intensified natural disaster. One of the things we know about climate change is that it intensifies all of our collective vulnerability to extreme weather. From devastating wildfires in Australia, in California, in the Pacific Northwest, hurricanes in Puerto Rico and the Bahamas, the Gulf Coast, and around the globe, we are seeing stronger storms and harsher impacts. One of the most pernicious effects of disaster is that disaster often hits hardest among already marginalized communities. Disaster intensifies pre-existing inequalities. From poor infrastructure and fewer protective measures to assumptions that evacuation plans assume easy access to a personal car and a sufficient bank account. All of these things make communities of color, elders, people living in poverty, substantially more likely to lose their lives when disaster strikes. Disability further raises the stakes. The structural barriers that disabled people face every day, from inaccessible infrastructure, subpar public transportation systems, shoddy communication access, endemic poverty, limited voice in civic governance, all those things and more become a matter of life or death during disaster. This is one of the things that makes climate change so pernicious. While climate disruption will ultimately affect all of us, certain people live closer to the storm. People of color, poor people, elders, disabled people, fat people, queer and trans people, people living under colonialism's long shadow. In short, those who already face intense structural violence are also the most vulnerable to climate disruption and the least able to mitigate its effects. But here's the thing. When we think about vulnerability, we have to be very careful. Recent media accounts have helped draw attention to the risks that disabled people face. I'm thinking about stories of New Yorkers trapped in high-rise apartment buildings for days after Hurricane Sandy. I'm thinking about nursing home residents in Florida who died from extreme heat when their institutions failed to evacuate for Hurricane Irma. I'm thinking about disaster warnings that are so often inaccessible to deaf communities, about emergency shelters that leave wheelchair users stranded outside. But there's a huge risk in naming vulnerability, in highlighting these particular dangers that disabled people face. All too often, the way we think about disabled people's vulnerability during disaster and climate disruption depoliticizes the problem. It makes it seem inevitable that people with disabilities become climate casualties. Let me give you an example of what I mean. After a recent discussion of disability and disaster, a colleague of mine threw up his hands. He said, it's terrible what you're saying, but what can you do? Some people just aren't going to make it. Oh. So once I got over my outrage, I realized my colleague had unwittingly named a core problem facing those of us organizing for climate justice. That's the assumption that some folks simply aren't cut out to survive. I refuse that assumption. Now, it's true that there are physical dimensions of disability that make disaster response more complicated. But the biggest problems, they're social, political, and structural. During Hurricane Katrina, as doctors and nurses faced brutal choices about triage, who got left behind? The people who were judged too frail, too fat, or too disabled to save. That risk isn't some natural consequence of disability. Those are human choices, social, structural choices to value certain bodies and minds, to build for, plan for, and prepare for certain bodies and minds, and to leave others behind to die. It's not just a matter of triage. It's also a question of planning and preparedness. It's a question of the way the very structures of our society drive home inequality. If we persist in framing disability and climate change as a problem of physical vulnerability, we miss the underlying realities of structural violence, the way that ableism, racism, class inequality, and other forms of oppression work together to compound and intensify risk. To understand the intersection of disability and climate change, to recognize the politics of survival at stake here, we have to recognize the way these choices are shaped by ableism. By ableism, I mean a complex set of power structures that privilege certain bodies or minds as normal, while designating others as abnormal, as well as a whole host of systems, practices, and attitudes that stigmatize disability and deny people with disabilities access, agency, resources, and self-determination. Ableism conspires with racism and white supremacy, with classism and capitalism, with queer and trans hatred, with ageism, misogyny, and fat phobia, to make certain lives seem less valuable, less worthy of protection. Let me give another example, one that's drawn from our present pandemic. For people with disabilities, the social risks of COVID-19 are stark. Many disabled folks rely on care workers and personal attendants who work for low wages and few benefits, whose social safety nets are thin or non-existent. Many of us live in poverty, making it harder to stock the fridge and prepare for quarantine. Some people with disabilities live in institutions or group homes where residents have few choices and no good options, where staff have even less access to personal protective equipment than hospitals, where lockdowns have eroded already shoddy systems of accountability, leaving folks even more vulnerable to violence, neglect, and abuse. Those aren't body problems. That's ableism in action, working hand in glove with capitalism and white supremacy. We miss all that when we focus on physical vulnerability, as though physical vulnerability is the only reason that disabled people are adversely affected by disaster and crisis. And when we do that, it obscures the social and political dimensions of risk. It lets us off the hook for the way we've built a world that makes certain people less likely to survive. So I want to think with you now about these questions in Jewish terms. I've been doing that by thinking particularly with rabbinic traditions about the story of Noah. We're going to take a look at some Jewish texts now. So for those of you who might like the texts in front of you, there's a link on the website to a Google Doc so that you can have access to the texts yourselves and move through them as you like. Now, the story of Noah and the flood has been used so many ways in environmental discourse. Sometimes it gets used in outright anti-environmental ways to claim, for example, that the divine promise to never again flood the earth might protect us against catastrophic sea level rise. Others have used the Noah story to lay out a powerful case for environmental urgency, to read the text as a warning of dangers to come, to caution against human hubris, to push for climate justice, and to reckon with human violence. Those are the strands I want to pick up on today. I want to use the Noah story to think through the way we imagine the future, the way we grapple with the question of who gets to survive. In thinking about these questions, I'm indebted to the brilliant work of Jerome Cohen, a literary critic and environmental theorist, who argues that the biblical story of the flood, with its tiny little ark and a handful of chosen survivors, is a really dangerous cultural template, one that inscribes for us the inevitability of deluge and disaster, one that imagines the ark as the only route to survival. Cohen asks, what if we stopped playing the role of Noah, content to save only a small chosen community when the storm comes? What if we prepared instead collectively for cataclysm? What if we did not leave those outside our walls to drown? Cohen's question echoes powerfully within Jewish tradition, which has long had an ambivalent embrace of Noah. The biblical text imagines Noah as a righteous man, quote, who found favor with God. But the rabbis, the classical rabbis, give a much more hesitant portrait. They disapprove of his silence, his quick compliance when God decrees the earth's destruction. You know, in contemporary American culture, Noah's Ark is often imagined or portrayed as a children's story, with all those animals lined up neatly 2 by 2. But shift the frame, and the Ark becomes the original story of a gated community, a story about a handful of privileged survivors who stay snug in their boat while the rest of the world drowns. This is the question that haunts me in the Noah tale. The question of how a rosy narrative of the survival of a few gets laid over top of a watery grave. When modern Jewish communities read Noah's story today, our eye is often trained toward the rainbow, toward the promise that comes after the flood. But I am distrustful of that impulse, the way we all too easily efface the casualties and the memory of those who do not survive. My heart is with the lost and left behind, with the ones who drowned. So in my talk today, I'll focus on rabbinic stories, stories that embellish and expand upon biblical traditions, stories that circulated widely in Jewish late antiquity, in the Middle Ages, that continue to be told and retold today. I don't actually think these texts hold pragmatic solutions to climate disruption. And I also don't think these texts always give the right response in terms of ethical questions. As you'll see in a moment when I dive into the first text, I'm quite critical of some of the assumptions these rabbinic texts make. Some of these texts reinscribe violence and misogyny and cruelty in ways I think we must recognize and resist. But I find these ancient Jewish stories to be a powerful, potent site for grappling with the ethical dilemmas that climate change poses. I am drawn to them precisely because they're complicated stories, because they don't flinch from violence, because they help lay plain the dangers that we face. So let's take a look at text 1 on your handout. This is a story from the Talmud, an ancient Jewish story from the 4th or 5th century Babylonia. And it's a story that points to a rabbinic recognition of the problem. It's grappling with the problem of who gets left behind and why. Now, I want to warn you at the outset, this is a difficult story. It's actually a story I find quite toxic for the way that it stigmatizes survivors of sexual violence. I tell this story because I think it is an important story. A story that makes visible a bitter cultural truth about bodies that are stigmatized and despised. So the Talmud asks, how did they choose the animals to take on board the ark? How did they go about singling out the ones who would survive? To answer that question, one of the rabbis, Shmuel bar Nachmani, picks up on a strange detail in the biblical text. When Noah is instructed to take 7 animal pairs, the biblical text says ish and ishto, that is, husbands and their wives. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani asks, why does the text say of animals, take 7 husbands and wives? Isn't marriage an institution reserved solely for humankind? Ultimately, the rabbi argues that the chosen animals are those who comported themselves like proper married couples. That is, they've never been involved in sexual transgression. Now, to understand this story, it helps to know that ancient Jewish thinkers often imagined the earth before the flood as a place that was filled with sexual sin. It was a world, many of them thought, where humans often engaged in sex with animals, violating the moral lines that were supposed to distinguish between different species and kinds. So Shmuel says, when it comes to selecting animals to survive the flood, the ark only accepts those who are properly mated. Shmuel doesn't want any trace of sexual impropriety to enter into the ark or to come into the new made world. As a feminist reader, as a queer reader, As a reader attuned to the realities of sexual violence, I know this kind of thinking all too well. I know how notions of sexual purity get deployed to paint certain peoples, certain bodies as disposable, as refuse, as nothing more than trash. Our text goes on. How did Noah know? Rav Chisda said, he passed them before the ark. All that the ark accepted, it was known that a sin had not been done with them. And those that the ark did not accept, a sin had been done to them. According to this tradition, Noah passes the animals before the ark, and the ark itself becomes a moral arbiter, accepting some and turning others away. Every time I prepare a talk on the flood, I ask myself if I should snip out this text. Because every time I talk about it, it feels like a shaft to the heart. But I believe we must talk about this text because it names a pervasive tendency, not just in the Talmud, but also in our contemporary moment. This tradition makes manifest the exclusions of sanctuary, the way refuge is bought for a few at the expense of other bodies, bodies deemed unsavory, too ugly, too disabled, too fat, too poor, too queer, too brown to save. The Talmud's ark offers a profoundly conditional refuge. It offers sanctuary only for a tiny group of chosen few. So here's the question I think we must ask ourselves. Is this the limit of our refuge dreams? Is this the only way we can imagine sanctuary and survival? The work I do on disability and climate change is dedicated to forging a different answer. So let me tell you now my favorite resistance story. A story also from the Talmud, where the Talmud imagines a different kind of sanctuary. So this is text 2 in the Google Doc. This story comes from a different passage. It's a passage in the Babylonian Talmud that discusses how a mythical creature known as the Reim survives the flood. Scholars suggest that the Reim is likely a reference to the aurochs, an ancient species of cattle memorialized in prehistoric cave paintings. But there's an ancient tradition that identifies the Reim differently, as the unicorn. Now, in contrast to the popular song where the unicorn gets left behind when the flood comes because it's playing games and splashing in the rain, the Talmud gives a different account. The Talmud takes for granted that the Reim survives. The question is, how? The Talmud describes the Reim, or in Aramaic, the Rema, as an enormous creature. Rabbi Rabba Bar Chana says he once saw a day-old child of the Reim, and it was as large as Mount Tabor, 40 parsangs long. Now, in case you are not up on your ancient measurement, right? What's a parsang, you might ask? Modern commentators actually disagree on the precise measure, but many suggest that each parsang is around 2.5 miles. Suffice it to say, even a newborn Reim is not likely to fit in your apartment, and it would have posed quite a challenge to bring her onto the ark. Her neck alone, Rabba Bar Chana says, is 3 whole parsangs. And when she excretes, the poop is big enough to dam up the River Jordan. Now, I love this tradition as a way of thinking about disability and the flood, because this is a story that paints so plainly the problem of access. It's a story about a body that doesn't fit in conventional space. The Reima's body exceeds the expected boundaries. Hers is a body for which accommodation must be devised. As a wheelchair user, it's something I know well, an experience I really identify with. The rabbis lay out a number of possibilities about how this happens. Maybe they tied her horn to the ark. So the ark was like a giant piece of driftwood that she could float beside. Maybe she rested only the very tip of her nose upon the deck, just enough to let her breathe. And when the Talmud raises an objection, recalling a tradition that the floodwaters were so boiling hot that surely the Reima couldn't have survived like so, the text suggests that a miracle was performed for her, that a little bubble of cool, still water came to surround the ark to let the unicorn survive. It's a moment of what we might call divine accommodation, this little portable bubble sanctuary that surrounds the big, beautiful body of the Reima in the midst of the raging flood and keeps her safe through the storm. Now, let me be clear. I don't think we can lift up this story as somehow solving the ethical problems raised by the flood or the dangers posed by this fantasy of celebrating a small group of elite survivors. But I tell this story today because I hear in it the reminder that the ancient rabbis were grappling with the problem of exclusion, with the problem of access. I hear in it a recognition of and an empathy with the bodies that don't fit on the ark, the bodies who have no refuge, the ones who can't make it to sanctuary. Here is what I love about this story. The tellers of our tale want this big, beautiful, fat, queer, crip creature to survive. Our story suggests that the Reim's survival was a confluence of human ingenuity and divine intervention. But telling this story, I'm mindful of the Talmud's insistence that it is forbidden to rely on a miracle. Elsewhere, the Talmud says we're not allowed to put our collective faith in this kind of divine intervention. Faced with a rickety bridge or an unstable wall, we can't rely, the Talmud says, on divine protection. Instead, we have an obligation to avoid thrusting ourselves or others into danger. Fix the bridge, shore up the wall. We have a collective communal responsibility to change the situations that might require divine rescue and not simply put our trust in good fortune or in God. To think more about this collective responsibility, I want to tell another story from the Talmud. That's text 3 on the handout. It's a story about another unexpected survivor, the biblical king Og, the ruler of Bashan. According to rabbinic and medieval Jewish traditions, Og was one of the primordial giants, the only one who survived the flood. A midrash in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer lays out how this happens. According to our midrash, Og sat on a piece of wood that extended from one of the gutters that leads out of the ark. It's fabulous, actually. There's a whole sort of sanitation system imagined here in the construction of the ark. So Og, it seems, was tall enough that he could sit at the very bottom of the ark and still keep his head above the waves. But the problem he faces, according to our midrash, is how to find sufficient nourishment during the duration of the flood. He's got a good seat, but what's he going to eat? It's Noah who saves him. Og swears fealty, and Noah bores a hole in the side of the boat. And Noah brings Og food every day and every night. And so Og too survives. I'm struck by the risk here. The fact that making a hole in the ark in the midst of the flood might well have intensified the danger for those already on board. I wonder, were there those on board who counseled Noah not to risk it? Not to make a breach in their tidy little boat? Not to think beyond their walls? Not to worry about those outside? Our Midrash imagines Noah as breaking the boundaries of the ark, deliberately refusing to police those borders. It's a striking act, especially because elsewhere, this Midrash imagines God as sealing the borders of the ark with God's own hand. In that moment, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer's God is engaged in a kind of moral improvement scheme. Those undesirable creatures are supposed to be washed away so that everything can be clean, beautiful, and new. Let me be very clear. I reject that vision of God. I don't believe in a God who orchestrates catastrophe or climate change, who sides with eugenics or with genocide, or who decides to condemn all us creatures, humans and hedgehogs and caterpillars and oak trees, to sudden and terrible death so the world can get a fresh new start. When catastrophe comes, the God I love, the God I know, is right in our midst, binding up as best she can the shattered pieces. The God I love is the one who strengthens the rescuers, the one who hands out N95 masks to folks living unhoused, the one who organizes backup batteries for disabled people who need oxygen and power for their electric wheelchairs. The God I love is the one who wants Noah to bust through that walled sanctuary and share his family's food with those who are closer to the storm. Noah is an ambivalent character in the Jewish rabbinic imagination precisely because in most accounts of the flood story, Noah fails to take that kind of action. Notice how different this Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer tradition is from the biblical story of Noah. In the Bible's account, Noah seems entirely unconcerned when God tells him about the plan to destroy the earth. That silence leads the rabbis to express serious moral reservations about Noah's character. They disapprove of Noah's silence. They disapprove of his agreement, or at least his acquiescence, when God decrees the earth's destruction. Many Jewish traditions champion instead the example of Abraham, the one who protested God's plan to destroy the city of Sodom, the one who asked, "Shall not the judge of all the earth act justly?" That's a question from the Bible. How, the biblical Abraham asks, how can you, God, condemn them all to die? So let me close with one more text, text 4 on the handout. It's a passage of the Zohar that makes this critique of Noah explicit and also offers a different theological vision, right, of God's own desire. The Zohar imagines God's response when Noah emerges from the ark, when Noah sees the devastation and begins to weep, looking out at the ruins of the earth at that flooded landscape, Noah asks, God, why did you allow this to happen? Our text says, God, you are called the master of compassion. Why didn't you have compassion for your creation? That's Noah's question. But God isn't moved by Noah's critique. Instead, God asks why Noah didn't act when Noah had a chance. God says, now you plead on their behalf. I lingered with you and spoke to you at length so that you might ask for mercy for the world. But as soon as you heard that you would be safe in the ark, the evil of the world did not touch your heart. You built the ark and saved yourself. I tell you these stories today because the moment we live in lays before us a similar choice. While none of us know for certain what the future brings, our own climate prophets tell us that the waters will likely rise. We have choices to make, choices that can still blunt the force of the storm. But the choices on my mind right now aren't just the choices we can make to mitigate the force of climate change and stem the tide, slow the flood. They're also the choices we make about how we respond when crisis comes. Which Noah will we be, friends? The one who tucks himself into a private sanctuary, floating tight above the waves, or the one who breaks the boundaries of the ark? This is what I want for us, that we choose to resist the lure of the closed community, that we aren't satisfied with a tiny little ark where just a few float safe upon the waves. This is what I want for us, that we plan and strategize and scheme now, before the waters come, that we commit ourselves to work not just for personal sanctuary, but for a world where all of us survive. Thank you.
Julia, thank you so much for that beautiful talk. I feel like I need another minute to just really sit with these profound truths that you've just shared with us. I want to remind our audience members that they can send in questions for the Q&A at any time. To send in a question, use your phone, open another tab on your browser, visit slido.com/Belser, where you can type in your questions, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible in the time that we have with Professor Belser.
May I just add also that if folks would like to send in other kinds of responses, resonance, appreciation, something that spoke to you, you're welcome to do that too. It doesn't have to be a question. So feel free, if you'd like to use that space, to share thoughts in that vein as well. From my perspective, you're more than welcome to do that.
Yeah, I suppose an advantage of this virtual age is that all of our listeners and people tuning in can choose to kind of read the responses, right? So even if we don't have a chance to read your comment, you have another way to engage. And that's really, I think, important to us here at the Strom Center. We really look forward to this lecture series all year long. It's a time of really high engagement. It's really the highlight of our programming. So, you know, we're online, but we're going to make the best of it. So do engage in whatever way you can, and know that Professor Watts-Belser and I are here for it. Okay, so while people are kind of gathering their thoughts and forming some questions, just reflect what I heard. You named some the really kind of exclusionary undercurrents in a lot of our conversations about crisis and climate change and catastrophe, the exclusionary framing that often accompanies stories of survival. And you're able to connect these with some of our most ancient stories, right? Our biblical stories of Noah's flood. But the other story that came to me was the stories of the survival of the destruction of the temple, way back in the 6th century BCE. And this is what scholars often term remnant theology, right? The theology that's constructed around stories of a few surviving, a pure minority surviving, which, as you were talking, I realized is actually very similar to rapture theology, which is a much later kind of Christian retelling of this Jewish remnant theology. So I was thinking about how powerful those stories are in the Jewish and Christian religious traditions, and how these are stories that originally originated with minorities, right? And that seemed to give minorities a lot of strength. So what I'm hearing you say is minorities, even in their disempowerment, need to be able to kind of make the switch. So I wanted to kind of ask you to help me think through that, and how do we teach that? And
it's a really wonderful question. Thank you so much. I think there's a number of things going on here. I think that the stories we tell about crisis, when we're looking back on crisis, are often stories that aim to help us make meaning out of a terrible event, right? We are creatures who are drawn to meaning. Okay? And so I think that often it helps me to think about that kind of meaning-making impulse as part of the, certainly it's an impulse that animates the work of historians. It's also an impulse that animates the work of theologians, of religious thinkers, of writers. Right? So when we experience catastrophe, we often look for ways to make meaning of that event that does not let catastrophe become the end of the story. I think that's extraordinarily valuable. I think that's a really important impulse. But I think there's a way that it can also become dangerous when it becomes a kind of explanatory paradigm for why certain people survived. Okay? So there's a tendency sometimes for this, for these kind of explanatory accounts to moralize catastrophe, right? To understand crisis in moral terms. And one of the things, I did tonight was to show how victims of catastrophe, the stories we tell about catastrophe often impute negative moral meaning to victims, right? In contemporary parlance, we call this victim blaming also, right? It's something that allows us to see victims as somehow responsible in part for their own victimization. And that, I think, we absolutely must resist, right? As an ethicist, I think that's an extraordinarily dangerous move, one that uses the power of meaning making, right, to reinforce and reinscribe social inequality, okay? And to right, it's a very dangerous tool. So I think that in my view, these tools toward meaning making work best when we use them in ways that combine a sense of hope and possibility with a sense of self-critique. But it's really important that self-critique be really self-critique and not like a critique of folks who aren't quite like us, right? Yeah. That's the sort of blaming move that then attributes the catastrophe to folks who didn't do right. Right? One of the things that really draws me to a lot of rabbinic literature is that I think actually I often find that self-critical voice in a lot of rabbinic stories. The rabbis, I think, often tell stories where they aren't always the unabashed heroes, right, of the story, where the story is often meant to suggest that actually there's ways in which rabbinic culture, their own cherished heroes, also have things to learn, things that should be different. That, I think, is a very powerful move.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, so our most upvoted question right now, I think it's a question of the imagination. The question is what the ark would look like if it was built with Reim in mind to begin with.
I so love this because it's a marvelous question. It's a marvelous question, and I think it also helps us hone in on the problem. Retrofitting access after the fact, right, is always an inferior solution. The ideal solution is build it in from the start, right? Build the most accessible boat possible. Plan for the Reim, right? Mm-hmm. And then you won't have to engage in these very dubious schemes, right, of using a little portion of the ark like driftwood and, you know, the little bubble and all of those things, right? These are after the fact, cobbled together solutions, quite clever, quite good, but yikes, you know, really not a great schema. This is a story in some ways that also showcases a pretty disastrous failure of planning. So, okay, of course, I'm interested architecturally from an access perspective on what it would take to radically redesign the ark. But I think the other question I want to think with is, why are we stuck on an ark? Right? Yeah. The ark is actually, there's something about the ark that is inherently exclusionary. Yes, you could build, theoretically, though it would be more of a yacht, I guess, than an ark, right? Enough space for at least a mini Reim, right? A baby Reim to maybe get, it's sort of like, I don't know, a big cruiser or something. I'm really not up on ship technology. So I'll leave that. I'll leave the raw design questions to the experts. But I think the question that I would ask here is, could we do better than an ark at all? I think in some ways this is the question that I really learned from my friend and colleague Jerome Cohen, right, who says the ark is such a part of our cultural imagination for Jews, for Christians, but also for secular folks, right? Lots of folks kind of have a reference to the idea of Noah and the ark. It appears all over the place in nursery schools, right? Like I said, I really don't think the ark makes good children's story material. What would be different about this story if we assumed that it wasn't enough to just save a few? That's the question that I'm really interested in strategizing about, right? And I think that question has a lot to do with mobilizing local communities, because local communities often understand really well the particular specifics, right, of not just saving people, but also culturally specific places, right? Retaining neighborhoods, community bonds. Right? I think, first of all, those are the things that are most likely to save us, but they're also the things that I most want us to try and save, so that we're not just rescued as atomized individuals, but we find shelter with our communities intact.
So here's a related kind of question from Harley. She says it's a cruel question that God said, like poses to Noah, right? Why is it on Noah to plead and beg when God is the one enacting this catastrophe, right? It doesn't seem like Noah is the person in the position of true power in this dynamic.
Absolutely. It's a great observation. It's such a setup for Noah, right? Mm-hmm. Now, so first, I think I'd answer this in a couple of different ways. So first, just in terms of the genre of the literature that we're dealing with, right? The Zohar, and like a lot of Jewish literature before it, right, is right, like Midrash. These are texts that are bound by that. They're the texts that exist in a kind of really interesting space of both extraordinary potential for creativity, right, and also constraint. So we have to sort of see both elements. There's a lot of creativity here. Obviously, the biblical text knows nothing about this conversation between God and Noah, right? The Zohar has built this, right? Just like the biblical tradition doesn't know a single solitary thing about Noah saving Og from the flood, right? That's totally a moment of midrashic imagination. So extraordinary creativity on the one hand, but also constraint. The writers of our rabbinic texts do feel a certain kind of fidelity to the biblical tradition with which they are working. And so I suspect, right, that the notion of God as architect of the flood, right, seemed like a sort of immovable plot point, as it were, right, that isn't something that our text plays with. It's worth noting that, so as a historian, I want to be very, very careful about what's going on in the texts. But as a person, as a reader, as an ethicist, as someone invested in Jewish theology, I give myself more flexibility than the rabbis did. So as you might have noticed in my talk, I said, I am not in for that biblical expression of God. Because I too find that to be abhorrent, right? So difficult to imagine that ultimately that's a place where I, as a person, right, have said, nope, right? The holy nope, right? I love these texts. I care about them deeply. They speak to me. They matter to me. But sometimes, right? Sometimes I find myself just saying nope to certain aspects of certain texts. But this question is really interesting to me because I actually identify quite a lot with Noah. I think that the ambivalent portrait of Noah is actually really important to me. Because I think so often we're in that bind. So often we are in positions where we do have certain kinds of power and agency, but also not complete power and agency, right? It often does feel like a setup, right? We don't have free reign to orchestrate everything. And so that position that Noah is in of trying to figure out the best possible response amidst a really crummy set of circumstances, I think is actually a really interesting position to consider because it feels quite close to home for me, right? It feels quite familiar. I painted in the talk a kind of ambivalent portrait, this portrait of two different dimensions of Noah, right? Sometimes Noah is really deeply critiqued by rabbinic sources. Sometimes he's imagined as engaging in really heroic actions, making a great choice. And, frankly, I think that feels to me like a portrait that's true for a lot of us as well, right? Often poised in that place between self-interest and altruism, wanting to do, right? Wanting to live according to our best aspirations, but also worried about the cost. So that's, I think, another place where I really identify with Noah and find him, particularly in this complex, multivalent rabbinic, these different portraits of Noah, to be a really interesting figure and character for examining our own situatedness vis-a-vis climate disruption and disaster.
Thank you. I want to ask you a question that was posed and quickly withdrawn, because I think I saw in it the concerns I think some of my students will share. And I know you also engage with queer theory. So the question was about how one of the stories that you shared talked about the animals being married, right? Which is, it's a really, it's an odd reading, I would say. And it struck the reader that, it can be difficult to read these kind of heteronormative texts in the Bible. And just wondering, how do you engage with texts like these?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I spend a lot of time with rabbinic texts that I love deeply, but that I also find myself as a reader thinking like, really? Again? Still? So I have, as a reader, I've come to embrace that response as sort of part of the work that I do with these texts. First, to really try to take them seriously on their own terms, right? To understand how they work as a literary and cultural historian of the ancient world. I am just a person who's really deeply curious about the rabbis, about their imagination, about the way they understood and saw the world, the way they wrestle with questions. So even when they break my heart, I find them interesting, right? And so as a historian, as a scholar, right, as a person whose job it is to read these texts from the inside, I often follow that sense of like curiosity and empathy, like I want to figure out how your mind works and also what's at stake in the stories that you're telling. And it's that second piece where I find myself trying to bring my whole full complex, modern, postmodern, queer, feminist, disabled self to do the work of excavating the often unspoken cultural work that these stories are doing. So I see that as redemptive work, actually. I mean, I see that as work, right? So, for example, taking that really gross story about the ark and the animals, right? I hate that story. Right? But I am committed to telling that story first in a way that makes clear that I'm not championing the values of that story. So it's a place where I'm really transparent about my own feelings. I feel like I owe it to all of you, right? To let you know that I'm not sort of buttressing that story or giving it the stamp of approval. No, quite the contrary, actually. I think it's a really important story because it echoes a trope that doesn't just appear in rabbinic literature. That's a very, very strong trope in a lot of ancient sources and in a lot of contemporary culture. That dream of cleaning up or tidying up, right? Undesirable bodies. I mean, we just could look to sort of stories of gentrification, for example, to name just one trope, to think about how that story gets told, get the undesirable ones out, right? To make room for something new and good and beautiful and better. So I think it matters that we develop the tools to be able to name very precisely what's happening in these stories. And I think as a queer reader, that's one of my favorite tools for grappling with texts that don't affirm my full self, my own values, right? I want to lay bare the work that the text is doing and make it easier for us all to see that work, to see how it works, to demystify it, so that we're more equipped to not replicate it. And then I guess I would say I also find myself looking for, right, the Reim, right? The choice to go to the Reim. The Reim was this amazing find for me where I thought, I just, I identify the Reim as a creature, right, who is a sort of singular, unusual, non-normative creature. And so, while obviously the rabbis never thought about the Reim in precisely these terms, there's so much in their textual portrayal of the Reim that gives us, that invites contemporary readers, especially those of us who often feel sort of like outsiders in the dominant frames of the text, to sort of, I'm like, oh, there's my kind, right? That's my creature. There's me.
They're the unicorns. I love
exactly.
that. Gosh, I just want to name for a moment that I think people underestimate the power of stories, especially teachers in the classroom sometimes. And there's a sense of like, oh, I need to be objective and not talk about the emotional resonances of a story. And I think it's so dangerous to do that, because if you don't name, like as you are kind of modeling, if you don't name the harsh edges of a story, you sort of are saying, yeah, the story's fine. The story can continue.
Right.
So I think it's so important that we think about the subtle messages.
Exactly. Mika, this is something that I am, Jewish feminist Judith Plaskow really lays this out so beautifully in her work, where she talks about the importance of looking at the difficult places in text and not reading past them or skipping over them in order to find like a pretty message. And that insight, which I learned from her, that if we don't look at the difficult places in text, we sort of leave them to do their work, right? They continue to work on us. We're just sort of not engaged. Yeah. I just really want to acknowledge her as someone from whom I deeply learned the importance of doing that explicitly. And yeah, I don't know how to talk about these stories without, I shouldn't say that, in grad school, I was taught a very different mode of speaking about and relating to texts. But I guess that's a sort of arc that I've busted out of, because I think that it really, I think it's crucial, at least for me as a scholar, to always root myself in careful readings of the text and historically anchored understandings of the text. But to assume that's the only thing I can do, or that requires abdicating my own humanity, feels to me like a real loss and something that I'm not willing to do. I think you're right, in the classroom especially, it so matters that we open up those spaces for conversation.
Yeah. And that was Judith Plaskow that Professor Belser just named. We're going to ask you for a reading list later, because one of the questions was what other Jewish texts you recommend that offer wisdom in the era of climate change. So you can name a couple, but if it's okay, maybe we'll ask you for a reading list.
Yeah, exactly. Let me press pause on that right now,
okay.
and think a little bit about and pull together a little bibliography of some of my favorites, or some of the materials also that I referenced in the talk. It's a lovely idea. Thank you.
Yeah, another way to engage with this year's Strong Lecture is reading lists. Okay. Okay, so another question. So several audience members are wondering about your opinion on the term disability. They say because it is defined in part by social construction of normalcy, is it problematic? Is this label necessary? What would you say?
Wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking. So I find I find it really helpful to use the term disability, and this is a move that is broadly shared among disability activists and organizers. So there's a really wonderful community of disability identified folks, right? And of course, there's a lot of differences in how people choose to identify. You might have noticed that during the talk, I would kind of flip back and forth between saying people with a disability or disabled people. And that's in part because there's a number of differences of opinion among disability communities today about some people prefer one style, some people prefer another. It's a whole lot of reasons and thinking along that I don't think we need to dive into at this particular moment. But my choice to kind of big tent embrace both of those ways of speaking about disability is rooted in that recognition, and kind of comes out of my own engagement with disability community. On the choice to use the term disability, I really care about, and I think it's very important that we collectively learn to use the term disability and don't shy away from it. Or so I don't think of disability as a negative thing or as an it's a complex gig. There's some upsides and some downsides. Deaf communities have a really wonderful way of describing deaf gain, right? The wonderful things that deafness brings to people's lives. Mm-hmm. But it's also, of course, worth noting, it's crucial to note that deaf and disabled folks live in a world and in a culture that is designed for non-disabled people. So I choose to use the word disability in part because it names something really true about my life experience. It helps me name the experience of ableism. It helps me name the experience of not fitting into normative spaces. It helps me name an experience that's been a deep part of my own life, that of disability-related stigma and misperceptions. Right? Now, I choose to claim and reclaim the term disability as a powerful, chosen identity. I don't mean to say like I chose to be disabled, right? But I choose to use this word to describe my own identity, to name something crucial and valuable, if complicated, about my own life. It's a move, I think, that's actually quite similar to the reclamation of the term queer. Of course, you can use, right? We probably all know that the term queer or the term gay can be used as an insult. But that term is also a point of pride, of self-identification, of value, of claimedness by a lot of LGBTQ folks today. So disability for me is really similar.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to combine 2 questions. Carol says she really appreciates your reference to ableism and creating a built environment that increases the impact of hazards. And she wonders how the organized Jewish community can help. And I know you work a lot with activists, so we can think also beyond the Jewish community. But a similar question actually was from Debbie about like which Noah, your question. She said she loved your question about which Noah will he be, and can you comment on Noah's wife? Did she acquiesce to his patriarchal decisions? What can Noah's wives do today? So I sort of see this as similar because it's kind of from 2 different kind of locations. How can we act differently?
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, so I actually think there could be a really powerful role for Jewish communities, for religious communities, and other cultural communities in general, to become more involved with disaster response. And I think one of the things that feels particularly important to me is that it's common for us to take a sort of charity-focused approach to response. And I think Jewish resources actually really, right, Jewish tradition actually gives us a lot of resources to be a bit critical about a pure charity model, right? Rather than charity, oh, I'm going to do something for you poor people, right? Jewish tradition often really frames this as an obligation of tzedek, right, of justice. Right? What does justice require of us? So I think that thinking about that framework and thinking about this in a very micro level, like planning commission, right? Local city board, more curb cuts, better public transportation, right? These sort of not so sexy questions about infrastructure are often really, really crucial questions. Now, I think it's the case that a lot of times, right, communities don't necessarily, especially non-disabled, predominantly non-disabled communities, don't necessarily know a lot, right, about the disability-specific dimensions of these questions. This is where it also becomes really, really important to do deep homework and relationship building. This is a great moment, like plan now so that you're ready. God willing, we'll have many, many years before you need the relationships in this particular kind of a crisis way. But start now because it takes time. What are some of, and it's worth, I think, trying to figure out who might be your resources for learning more about disabled artists, cultural workers, people. Again, I tend to prioritize particularly folks who identify with disability communities. Right? These are often small grassroots groups, not big, flashy disability big picture disability fundraising organizations, but like smaller local grassroots. So it becomes a really interesting question of how to build some of those relationships and partnerships. But this is work that I would love to see Jewish communities do, because one of the things that really matters to me is that people with disabilities, disabled people, will be recognized not just as objects of care, but as experts and co-conspirators in the figuring out of solutions, right? In the, not just as recipients of charity, but as players at the table when decisions get made. That's a power shift. That's also really, really important. I'll lift up also, there's a wonderful organization that I would encourage folks who are interested might learn more about and support. That is the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. The Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. And that's a disability-led national organization, very super grassroots, right? Small budget organization, but an organization that does extraordinary work, helping to respond to crisis situations and to prioritize the needs of people with disabilities when we're affected during a crisis. So.
Thinking of nothing about us without us.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So don't launch a thing, right? Make sure to be in deep relationship rather than just dreaming up a solution that doesn't begin with and doesn't get led by the folks who are most affected by the crisis.
Okay, I want to return to the ancient past for a moment.
Beautiful. I'm ready.
So a couple of audience members asked this about, why did only one giant survive? Was there something special about Og? Why didn't the giant have a pairing like the others did?
So interesting. I wonder if this is actually we're back to heteronormativity, but yeah. I wonder if this is actually a reproductive problem. Right? So I don't know. The text doesn't tell us, but I'm just speculating that the so many of the texts in this tradition, the survival-oriented texts, are really very focused on bioreproduction, right? And the generation of new bodies, Og doesn't have a pair. In part, I wonder, I suspect, because ultimately Og's survival is a short-term survival. It's not, right? His line, his lineage doesn't continue. I'm riffing, right? But that's what I think in light of my reading of these texts.
Yeah, I've heard a wonderful theory, and I'm kicking myself because I can't remember the name of the scholar, that in antiquity, just like today, occasionally people stumbled across dinosaur bones. But of course, in antiquity, they didn't know what giants were, or they didn't know what dinosaurs were, so they would reconstruct the dinosaurs as giants. So that's why the myth of giants are found kind of around the world.
Interesting.
So I love that we also see it in the Hebrew Bible, just like, what happened to the giants?
I think there's also here a kind of question about the sort of the unknowable past. You know, there's a way in which we're grappling, these texts are also grappling with a sense of something irretrievable, something that is truly lost. And it's actually why I find it so amazing that for the Reim survives. Right, that the Reim, though again, I guess it's the same question. The Reim is singular here, so maybe the same dynamics apply.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I think I want to end with this really lovely question from Lior. Okay, I'll combine two questions because there's so many good questions we won't get to. So Lior says she's reminded of Aurora Levine's Morales' poem, A World in Which We All Survive. What is your vision of a more thriving world, even amidst climate catastrophe? And there was another question about the space for joy in the time of catastrophe, and I felt like that was kind of related.
Yeah. I love both of these questions, and I think it feels to me so important to train ourselves now. Right? 2020 and 2021 have actually been a year where we can do a lot of work on this score. To hold both things together, the fact that we are living in the midst of extraordinary tragedy, that many of us are struck by grief upon grief upon grief. And also that this is still a world where there are joys and pleasures. I think it's so important, of course, when we think about this, to be really careful not to script that on other people. Because one of the worst things we can do when someone is in a state of grief or despair or lamentation is to just tell them to be happy, right? So I think this suggestion really works only as a sort of invitation for ourselves. So if it speaks to you, consider it. If it doesn't speak to you, feel free to leave it aside. But for me, one of the most important things that I can do is to realize that joy and sorrow don't cancel each other out. That pleasure and grief, hope and deep sadness, sometimes even despair, that they can be like a breath apart from each other. So that's a piece that feels really, really important to me. And I spoke about this a little bit in the first lecture, right? Thinking about the way in which my own experience with disability, my own immersion in disability culture has really been, has helped hone for me that kind of sensibility of holding it, taking a sort of both and approach. When it comes to the question, right, of dreaming a world in which we all survive, I'm struck by Aurora Levine's-Morales's brilliant insight that creativity and imagination is one of the best tools we have when it comes to dreaming a better world. So that sometimes the hardest thing is to dream big enough, to really, really feel like it could be different, like we could do it. So I was very, very lucky to have Dr. Levine's-Morales speak to my students in class a year ago, a Judaism and gender class. And one of the things she did was an exercise right near the end of the class where she invited all of us to imagine a world where we were talking particularly about gender, so patriarchy and misogyny were just like gone. And she asked us, what would it be like? And then tried to help us get really, really specific. What would it feel like? How would we know? What would we do differently? And it was an extraordinary exercise that really stayed with me, in part because it was very, very difficult. One of the things that we all did was say, well, it couldn't be like this because, or, oh, well, this would be really hard because, and she said, no, dream bigger. And that's what I would love to leave us with tonight, that invitation to really do that work of the imagination and then begin to do the work that builds up underneath it, the architecture and the infrastructure that can make that possible. Thank you so much, friends. Those amazing questions. You're really a phenomenal group.
Thank you so much. And thanks for this excellent homework. Okay, everybody knows what you're going to be doing the next few minutes. On behalf of everyone at the Strum Center for Jewish Studies, I want to thank Julia Watts-Belser, our wonderful staff, UW Video Services, our wonderful ASL interpreters, our community. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being in community with us. Do check your email for a reading list and other follow-up links. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening or wonderful night wherever you're tuning in from.